Well, the one from Uzbekistan, I don't know her very well, but I mean, I wouldn't consider that an exotic country, though. That's a historically interesting country for sure, but third world, exotic country. Europe, Asia, Japan, many, many beautiful girls from Japan.
I'm dating one of them.
Oh, good,
Yeah.
good.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, no, it's all right, it's fine. But exotic country, the most beautiful girl. God, there's been many. I'm thinking of, I've never met, well, okay, I can go to this story then. This will be in my book. In 2007, a gentleman moved here that is an example, a prime example of what I was speaking to earlier. And that is that I've made lifetime friends with other employees. And this gentleman's name was Chris. And Chris came from Western New York, Jamestown, New York. And he seemed like a conservative type of guy, but he was actually liberal. He had a conservative job, that's for sure, because he worked for the parent of Wells Fargo company called Wells and Company. Wells and Company is the parent company of Wells Fargo Bank. And he was their in-house editor for all publications at a building at Van Ness near Market. Van Ness near Market. And the reason I thought he was conservative was because he was dressed for work one day in a regulation white shirt, dark pants, coat, tie. So, and that we don't see too many people in suits unless they're going to work anyway at the Monroe. So we became friends because I trained him to work on the front desk at night on the shift before mine, which is from 4 p.m. to midnight. And Chris's claim to fame was not only being an editor, but he said he went to I asked him where he went to school, and he had a good sense of humor, and I realized it when he said, I went to the Harvard of the East Coast in the state of Maine that no one's ever heard of. And I said, really, what would that be? I don't have a clue. He said, it's called Bates College, and it is known in his circles anyway, in the East, as the Harvard small colleges in the East. Yeah. So he said, then we got to be friends by having a similar sense of humor and making jokes about certain people that worked here or lived here, managed here, and making fun of the rules because we're both nonconformists at heart and liberals and Democrats. And so we got along well. And then we started playing Scrabble together, Scrabble. Now Chris is an editor, a professional editor. He made a good living, and he always complained about his mom, but with that complaint, he also added that he's paying the house payment on his family house. He's been paying it ever since his parents broke up. His father moved to Florida and married a younger woman, blonde. His mother's brunette and older, and couldn't afford the house payment, so Chris took over, stepped up, took over, paid it. But his I guess his irritation with having to let go of part of his paycheck, a significant part of his paycheck, was to make complaints, but in jest, but you couldn't tell that he was joking at first. So we would joke about her. And, but we were playing Scrabble, and he lost. He kept losing. I kept beating him. And, I saw no problem with that, of course. I was a little older than him. I had more experience. I hadn't had more schooling. He had just as much colleges. He graduated from Bates, and I don't know if he had much graduate school, but we had about the same amount of college. And so after I beat him about 5 games in a row over a couple of weeks' time, or 3 weeks, or a month, he, in frustration, he walked away after losing the 5th time and said, "You know, you're not supposed to beat me. I'm an editor." I said, "And?" And he said, "And my vocabulary has to be bigger than yours." And I said, "Well, you certainly, maybe you'll get better. I mean, people improve as they play." He said, "Oh, I'll get better, all right." And then 2 or 3 games later, after his 7th loss, on the 8th game, he started winning. And I noticed how. And because he thought he'd had a lot of time to think about this, about 2 months to think about it. So the way he started winning was not to use any words that I was unfamiliar with. In fact, it was the opposite. If anything, he would check the dictionary to look up the words that I played, to challenge them, and they'd always be real. But he studied the board after I put up my first word, and he would calculate all the possibilities to play off every letter that I put down on the board, and he would eliminate all of those possibilities and then play his word, so that I could play nothing but maybe a 2-letter word like it. And that's how he started winning. And after he won an equal number of games that he had lost to me, +1, he said, "Okay, well, I don't really want to play this anymore. It's not fun." And that's the last time we played Scrabble. So I said, "Oh, you like that?"
Oh my God, that's funny. Where was this guy from?
He was from Jamestown, New York. Oh, but your question was the most exotic country. And that's why I thought of this story, because Chris had an eye for the ladies, and they certainly had an eye for him. Employees, residents, he got hit on quite a bit because he's in prime time between 4 p.m. and midnight. So he was there, he was on duty. They always had questions for him, whether they were real or not. And he said, most of them, he said to me privately that he wasn't really interested in them, but he told them his dating rule was that it's got to be dinner or a movie, and you have to pay for it, he told the girl. And more times than I could believe, they took him up on it. Most of the time, they were ones that he was really not interested in at all, and completely unsuitable for him. They were decent looking, attractive, but not his type. But he would go out because they would buy him dinner or they'd buy him a movie. And I asked him one time, I said, "Well, what happened with your movie date with the lovely Kelly?" And he said, "She had her hands all over me from the time we sat down in the movie and the lights went down. She had her hands all over me. I had to stop her and tell her, I had to move 1 seat away. She moved next to me." And he said it was all joking around. He said she couldn't pay me enough. But then he met the girl that was his dreams at the time. And she was from an exotic country. And that country was Singapore. And this was in 2009, I believe, 2009. That was a momentous year for the Monroe and for Chris personally, because I sensed that he was really hooked on this girl. I said, "Why?" I said, "Other girls that have hit on you were more attractive, I thought." And he said, she's going to the Human Sexuality Institute to get her degree to be a sex therapist in Singapore for the Singaporean Army. And I said, "Is that true?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I believe her." And I said, "Okay." And so he went out on several dates with her, for which he paid for, because he did not apply his standard dating rules to her, because my word for her was she was the princess type, and Chris was an outdoorsy type guy, liked camping, took the lovely, let's call her Linda, the lovely Linda Lee, we'll call her Linda Lee, on a camping trip in California to Yosemite National Park and some other well-known parks to Californians. They ended up in Lake Tahoe at Donner, around the Donner Summit area, at a camp run by the Sierra Club, And Chris loved bargains. And his paramour, Linda Lee, asked him, well, how much was this cabin? And Chris said, oh, only $25 a night. And she said, really? Well, that's quite a deal. You're a good negotiator. And he said, yeah, well, the reason it's so low is because we have to do chores to offset the discount. And she said, what chores? And he said, well, dishwashing, laundry, garbage, taking out the garbage. And she immediately put her hands on her hips and she said, I'm not doing any of that. And so Chris ended up doing all of the chores himself. And she never did a thing except lay in bed, watch TV, sip drinks, and while he worked. And he wasn't happy with that, but he was in love with her, I guess. So she could do no wrong. So to make a longer story shorter, he ended up leaving the Monroe in 2010, the fall of 2010, moving to Singapore, having obtained, a very practically minded guy, he obtained a job in his field as editor for Bloomberg News in Singapore, and arranged an apartment for himself only. And as soon as he got to Singapore, she was there to meet him, of course, and everything was lovey-dovey in the communications before he got there. When he got there, he felt increasing pressure from her family because he was among all her family there in Singapore. And they're all Chinese, Singaporean, and they thought this was the American who's going to take our daughter away from us. So he had to deal with that attitude, and also the attitude that if we allow you to marry our daughter, you will stay here in Singapore for the rest of your life, and you will provide us with grandchildren immediately after marriage. So he had all these rules that were being laid down for him, and being the nonconformist that he is, he had a problem with that. And soon after he arrived in Singapore, Linda Lee told him her sad story of not being able to afford the skyscraper office for her sex therapy practice because the rent had been raised and her clientele was not built up to the point where she could afford it yet. So she asked him for a loan, which he loaned her a considerable amount of money, in the thousands, with the idea that she would pay it back when she built up the clientele. And he knew it wouldn't be too long, but he sent me an email one day. He said, Tim, I've had it. I can't take it anymore. And I said, Chris, what was the deal breaker? And he had been concerned about losing his thick head of hair prior to leaving here. But he said, this climate is terrible for my hair. That was it. That was his reason. But the real reason was because of the loan not being paid back. He hated that. He couldn't stand that. When he loaned somebody $1 here because they were short and they didn't pay him back, he couldn't stand it. And so it was that and the familial pressure and rules being laid down for him. And the job was okay, and it paid enough money for him. But with all those, that was 3 strikes with the hair falling out. And so he moved to Florida, immediately bought 2 fixer-upper homes, one in Sarasota, one in Bradenton, Florida, near where his father lives with his new wife and his stepmother. And fixed those houses up, leased them out, collects the leases, is sitting pretty financially. He's the sole owner of the house in Jamestown where he moved. of course, he broke up with the lovely Linda Lee, Princess Linda, when he left Singapore, never to be communicated with again. And he got back in touch with his girlfriend that he reluctantly broke up with in order to move to Singapore with the new girl. He broke up with the lovely Nicole from England, whom he was in love with until it was a long-distance relationship. She lived in the north of England or the middle of England, and he'd been there a couple of times to the family estate. Now, she was from a rich family, and when he stayed there the couple of times that he did, they rode horses together. He was waited on hand and foot by the staff, and meals